fiesta de la paz, te invito a hacer comunidad, refresca hoy tu corazón con alimento de amor.
Hello everyone and welcome. It's good to see a number of good friends logging in to today's webinar. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And it's a real joy to welcome you today to this webinar on Out of the Closet, Latin America Seeking Its Own Identity. Our presenters today are both leaders in a movement called Red Crearte that is working to foster music and liturgy throughout Latin America. Pastor Gerardo Oberman was born in the Netherlands. He's a pastor, poet, composer, and writer of liturgical texts. He currently serves as president of the Reformed Churches in Argentina and as coordinator of Red Crearte. Our other panelist today is Jimena Ulloa Montemayor, and she is in Mexico City. She's completed her studies in the field of archaeology, but she went on to do a master's degree in liturgy at the Theological Community of Mexico. And she loves working in the areas of liturgy and music, especially with children and youth. She's also been deeply involved in Baptists for Peace and serving as both a program coordinator and a board member. We certainly welcome you to participate in this session by making comments to one another in the chat. But if you have questions that you would like our panelists to deal with later in the webinar, just write those in the Q&A part of the at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I'm going to disappear and hand it over to our panelists. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mike, for the introduction, and thank you all of you to being part of this new webinar. If you see me sweating a lot, it's not only because I'm trying to do my best to speak English. That is not my first language, but my third language. But it is also because we are facing the worst summer in the last 100 years here in the south part of the continent. I'm now based in Colonia, very at the other side of Buenos Aires, where I'm supposed to live. I'm here for a week of work. And during the last day, we are facing more than 40 degrees Celsius. That means maybe 110 Fahrenheit. I'm not good in making a calculation, but something like that. It's very, very hot. And it is not better during the night, so we can't rest well. So that's why we are looking tired and sweating a little bit. Let me give some word of thanks to Mike for the invitation to share some thoughts in this webinar. Also to Brian for all the tech things and Stephen, and to Jimena to be willing to stay here to help me to share screen and run some videos. When thinking about this webinar and looking for a title that could summarize what I would like to be in the mind and heard of the participant of the webinar, this title came up to my mind. Out of the Closet, Latin America Seeking Its Own Identity. It sounds provocative, and maybe it is provocative, but not only that, it is also absolutely the truth. Let's see why. In the next slides, I want to share some slides, just to share the title of the points I will develop a little bit during this webinar. What are the doors of our closets? Let me start this slide, the next one, Mina, please, with a quote from someone living in Brazil, talking about the doors of the closet. He said, "When I was a child, I was in a church where the worship services followed exactly the model that had been brought by the North American missionaries in the 19th century. In my youth, I lived through a time of dissatisfaction with this model of worship and of various attempts to renewal. At the present time, I'm faced with the challenge of the impact of Pentecostalism and new styles of worship produced or influenced by Pentecostal movement. But the important thing is the first words of Gerson in this quote. This experience of Gerson has been and still is the experience of a great majority of Protestant faith communities in Latin America. For those communities that arrived with the European migration since the latest 18th century, especially from Germany, from Great Britain and Holland, they came not only with their dreams of a better life, but they came also with their language, with their faith, with their traditions, with their Bible, and with their hymn books. And sometimes, when the migration was organized, even with their pastors. And with all this, they built their churches, their temples, and their liturgy in a foreign land, in a strange land. And, well, this is perfectly understandable and even acceptable in a first instance, but decades later, if these traditions are maintained and if the same hymns are still sung, and even in some cases, if the language is maintained, there is something wrong, really wrong. For example, in the case of hymnody, we are still singing in Latin America, Gott ist gegenwärtig, a very old German song, or the globally known song, hymn, Amazing Grace. We are still singing that in our churches, and we are doing that for centuries or for decades. And that's in the case of churches coming from the migration from Europe. In the case of the churches that emerged from the arrival of North American missionaries in the south of the continent, they also brought their own hymnody with them. Methodist, Baptist, or Presbyterian churches transplanted their traditions and theology to this land, very different from the land from which they came, generating churches that did not always know how to adjust to their context. We are still singing, great is their faithfulness, for example. And the big question after saying this is, how do you can build your own identity in a strange land? And the way the most historic transplant or mission churches have built identity has been to cling their tradition of origin. And that has, for too long, been the lock that made it impossible to open the closet doors. So the doors of the closet are, first, the European migration with their own tradition, and the second door is the missionaries from North America bringing their own tradition to Latin America. And the lock is the way in how our churches here has built their own identity. This is the faith of our fathers, and we want to keep it. That is one of the locks. This is what makes us Lutherans or Methodist or Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever. That is another lock. How to open that lock? How to find the key? We go to the next one. Well, the first thing to find the key to open that lock that closed the doors of the closet is the contextual reading of the Bible. Maximino Cerezo is an excellent cartoonist from Catholic background. He is also a pastoral agent. Once wrote that our way of speaking is totally incomprehensible to today's world. With the astronomical knowledge we have, what does it mean to say God above? There is a language we use in the liturgy and in the Eucharist that is totally alien to younger generation. The old people put up with it, but they are the only ones. And this is really true. To open the padlock that prevents the opening of the closet doors of the closet, the key was to place the emphasis of identity not on the past, but on the present, and above all, on the future, on the new generations. So, identity should not be constituted on the basis of an inherited tradition, but on the basis of a common project in which to become involved. And the project was and is always the project of Jesus, the gospel project. So community and participative reading of the Bible became the first of the keys we found to open the lock and to begin to open the doors. Now we call that process decoloniality. And one of the first steps of decolonization, we can find it in the words of Pablo Sosa, someone you have probably met in some point of your lives. He wrote in some article the next thing I will quote. The gospel is like a little seed that needs to be planted. When the gospel is sown in Palestine, it grows a plant that we call Palestinian Christianity. When it is sown in Rome, it grows a plant of Roman Christianity. You plant the gospel in Britain and you have a British Christianity. A little later, the seed is brought to North America and the plant of North American Christianity grows. Now, when the missionaries came to our land, they brought with them not only the seed of the gospel, but also their own plant of Christianity, including the pot. It's so funny for me. I've read this many times. That makes me always laugh a little bit. A little later, the seed is brought to North America and a plant of North American Christianity grows. Now, when the missionaries came to our land, they brought with them not only the seed of the gospel, but also the plant with the pot, And he said, so what we have to do is to break the pot, take the seed of the gospel, plant it in the soil of our own culture, and grow our own version of Christianity. Great words, applauses for Pablo Sosa. And as a fruit of this first step of decolonization, new translations of the old hymns were produced with a fresh poetry and a little bit closer to the reality of the churches. In the case of Argentina, where I'm living, well, I'm now in Uruguay, but I'm supposed to live in Argentina. The new hymnal with the new poetry is called Cántico Nuevo, and it appeared around the 60s, and with precious translations by Federico Pagura, Pablo Sosa, and many others. The second step of the colonization, when the word decolonization was not yet so popular, was begun when Pablo Sosa and others began to apply it in a practical way in their pastoral work, in their theological teaching, and overall in their liturgical and musical productions. Suddenly in the churches, other words began to be heard and other sounds began to be heard. The new was being born. The doors of the closet were beginning to open, and it was precisely the sounds, the that initiates the second stage of the colonization. Not only new words and new poetry to old hymns, but new words with native rhythms. And we are now trying to listen to one of that songs, that first musical production with new words and a very native, typical Latin American rhythm. I can send you the link later so you can take a look to the full video, but it's just to give you an example on what happens after the second step of what I call decolonization. Maybe it is too big to call it decolonization, but it's the way I found to for you. Just a little bit more about the second step of the colonization. I want to say something more coming from an Anglican priest from Brazil called Jacin Marachin. I don't know if that name sounds familiar to you or not, but he was a very well-known Brazilian priest and musician, and produced a lot of music for Catholic churches also. And he was also a scholar in the field of liturgy, and he said this things I want to share with you. He proposed a profound process of liberation from the inheritance received or imposed from the North. He proposed a liberation from the domination of clergy. He said the liturgical action belongs to the people, and it is up to the people to decide on the agenda on their Sunday assembly. Wow. People can decide by their own or on the Sunday agenda. So no longer worship order in our churches. That's very fun, and I like it. I like it very much. So you can be surprised every Sunday when you come to church. He also proposed the liberation from the domination of the foreign formulas inherited from our first or second or third missionaries. He proposed a liberation from the tyranny of hymn books, also inherited, and from the alienating type of music brought to our churches. Well, I think this discussion can be the basis of one full webinar, a discussion about hymn books and how the hymn books can help us or not to develop a contextual liturgy and to be always contextual, answering with music and liturgy to the challenges of our own time in our own places. Last but not least, he also proposed a liberation of the false spirituality in which it fell. The idea that the liturgy should be, before anything else, spiritual has helped the church to certain hilarious conclusions. Among this, that worship should be serious and solemn. Have you ever heard that word in your own church? That the liturgy must be serious and solemn? What that means in our own context, in our own culture. Maybe it means something for you, living in the North, living in Canada, living in the United States. I'm supposing you are coming from that part of the world. Maybe I'm wrong, but it means maybe different things for other people living in other contexts, or overall in the south part of the world, what we call the global south. The third step of the colonization came a little bit later, when the words were free to speak and dance their own rhythm. And when I say that their own rhythm, I mean local rhythm, traditional rhythm from our own culture. Homero Pereira, I think I mentioned him before. He was an excellent musician from this region of the River Plate, specialized in tango, wrote me a letter for one of my research on liturgy in the River Plate, and he said, "What then shall we do so that the message of the gospel speak directly to the speculators, to the corrupt, to the exploiters, to those who would take over the life of entire societies and submit them to their totalitarian will?" Well, one of the things he could do, and we can do as musicians, as composers, as liturgies, is to write our own text and to put our own music to that, so we can speak in our own context to these exploiters, corrupt, and speculators. I want to share now one of the last videos where we can see Homero Pereira playing the piano. He was sick when we record this video in the Comunidad Teológica in Mexico some years ago, but it is really a pleasure to see him playing his own arrangement on the piano. So take some time to look at it. Well, you know, this song is very long, so we can only share some stanzas of it. The next slide introduces us in a new topic, because we also need to open the language closets in context of migration. If you can see this picture, there is another picture. I prefer the other one. Yes, this one. Thank you. The most spoken language as first language are in this order. Chinese is the first one. Spanish is the second one, speaking as first language in the world. And in third place appears English, very, very close to Arabic and to Hindi, very, very close. So we can still say that English is the third spoken language as primary language, but not for a longer time, I guess. And the official US Census also say that by 2060, the United States will have the biggest population of Spanish speakers in the world after Mexico, meaning that 1 in 3 people in the US will speak Spanish by 2060. What that means for us as churches, living and preaching and trying to give our witness in the United States and in Canada, mostly English speaking or not Spanish speaking countries. But English is still the dominant language. This clearly shows that English has been a language of domination, a language imposed or accepted by countries that were colonized by English-speaking countries. From Latin America, we want to help to change this reality. Overall, in countries where the Spanish-speaking population are growing and growing, we will give relevance to Latin America culture in that kind of situations. Let me quote now Claudio Carvalhaes, who is a Brazilian theologian who is now teaching in the United States. I think in Union Seminary, but I'm not sure. He said, trying to explain a little bit how to understand the complexity of Latin America. Latin America is a complex place and not always easy to understand. The history of colonialism deeply marks its developments, paradoxes, mixtures, hybridism, and moving definitions of culture, race, politics, religion, and social living. This presents a significant challenge to anyone who tries to compose any frame of explanation or understanding. Modernity and all its tragedies turned Latin American inhabitants into barbarians, sinking their machinery teeth deeply into the flesh and bone of Latin American bodies and land, making coloniality the very plague that turned everything into commodity and everyone sick to the point of death. You can see the full article of Claudio Carvalhaes here in, well, I will share later this slides with you so you can follow the reading if you want, if you like it. When we talk about Latin America, we are talking about this complexity, this richness and this diversity. Also, when we talk about our churches, and when we talk about liturgy and when we talk about music, we can see it a little bit in the next slide. The diversity, Latin American diversity is very clear when you look at the diverse musical genres that are present in Latin America, from Argentina to Mexico. And just to mention some of the music genres we maybe know, We have the bolero, salsa, bossa nova, merengue, bachata, cumbia, mambo, son, reggaeton, bomba, plena, rumba, samba. When all this kind of music you can read there. And the list could be very, very longer than this one. And what we are challenged to do is to find in this kind of rhythms, in the richness and diversity of Latin American musical genres, a way to challenge with the gospel our own context. One of the questions Homero Pereira made to me some years ago, how can we speak to our context in a way that people can easily understand? And take a look at this lot of opportunities to put music, to put words and musical styles that appeals to our own context in Latin America, and maybe for a lot of people also living in your own context, Spanish and Latin American people living in the United States and in Canada. The next slide, please. Well, one of the questions, if I had the time to put at it, was about the Catholic in Latin America. Well, the Second Vatican Council was a catalyst to strengthen the process of opening the locks that close the liturgical closets in Latin America. Because the Constitution Sacrosanctum Concilium on the sacred liturgy was a necessary key at that time to free the locks and mark a before and after for Latin American liturgy. And perhaps the most visible consequence in our continent was and still is the Eucharist liturgy of Lima, that came 20 years later than the Second Vatican Council, but finally an ecumenical liturgy agreed between the Catholicism and various Protestant traditions in the continent. So that is one very important thing to share with you. And because the Second Vatican Council allowed the use of native language in the Mass, that opened the doors also for the Catholic world to speak to the people in their own language. And we can give two very short examples of that. The first one is the Misa Popular Salvadoreña, one song of that Mass, very short seconds of that song. And the other one is one of the songs includes in the Misa Criolla, is from Argentina. So you can have some examples of the impact of the Second Vatican Council in the producing of new music to reach to the Latin American population.
Vamos todos al banquete, a la mesa de la creación. Cada cual con su taburete tiene un puesto y una misión. Vamos todos al banquete,
Thank you, Lena. Just to give you some little examples about how the Second Vatican Council influenced the local composer to produce this kind of music to reach better the local people. And of course, well, the Catholic Church was more smart than the missionaries coming from North America and to the churches that were built from after the European migration. They were smarter or faster in the way they inculturate to the local context, maybe in the line that Ansgar Shupunko mentioned it in his studies. You can see it in, well, that is for another webinar. If we begin to talk about all the kind of ladies you can find in different contexts in Latin America, and that is related to previous belief of the local population, and some things very close to the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church. But that is another topic, and I don't want to speak too much about that because I'm not specialized in that field. The Second Vatican Council gives also the opportunity to work in Latin America in a more ecumenical way, and you can see that in the creation of the Latin American Council of Churches in Latin America called CLAI, and that immediately created also a Latin American network of liturgy, Red Latinoamericana de Liturgia, where one name was very important, the name of Ernesto Barros Cardoso. It was also a Brazilian, and he started a very, very intensive movement of liturgical renewal in Latin America with an ecumenical and a very prophetic perspective. And when the Latin America Council of Churches began with some crisis, like all kinds of institutions around the world, and we decided with a very strong group of liturgy and musicians in Latin America to start another network not related to an institution, but supported by persons. That means without any kind of financial support, but also with the freedom to work without the strong connections that sometimes are related with the participation in an institution. And in the last edition of the Stanza, we briefly introduced our Red Crearte, or network of liturgy in Latin America, and we wrote there the next words. From this complex, multifaceted, and challenging thoughts, we want to present ourselves as Red Crearte, a network of liturgists and musicians whose main interest is the permanent liturgical and musical renewal of the communities of faith in Latin America. We tried to be an alternative to the exclusive dependence of the old European and North American hymnody, and to the massive penetration of praise music promoted by fundamentalist sectors linked to the gospel music industry. We are trying to do that since 20 years in Latin America, and since some years ago, we are also trying to improve a little bit more our English to present our work and our proposals to a wider audience, also in other contexts like the United States and Canada and Europe, because we really think that we have something to say and to dialogue with the churches and leaders and musicians in other parts of the world. let's move to the next slide because the time is running. And now we want to share with you some of the songs we produced as Red Crearte, songs that are present in many different styles, in some events or meetings of some institutions around the world. The first song was one of the theme songs of the past WCC assembly in Karlsruhe, Germany. That is not recorded there, but some of the local churches in Germany took the song and tried to put it in their own churches, but maintaining the original rhythm. This song is here proposed in a salsa rhythm. Well, when I proposed this song for the WCC assembly, some very good friend in a very good way told me, hey, Gerardo, that is not a lyric for a song. I mean the part of papara papa, but how do you make people of different backgrounds sing together in a common language? It is only with la la la, pa pa pa, pi pi pi, or whatever. You don't need to put lyrics on a song to make people sing together. Because if you write a song in English, only people who are able to sing or to at least to read in English can follow the song. And the same thing if you write a song in Spanish or in French or in any native language. So this was a kind of proof. If we could sing together without any other word than papara papa. Let us share another song that is a Gloria. It is in a Carnavalito read.
Preparemos el camino del Señor.
Preparemos el camino del Señor.
Since a long time, we are trying to work very close to the global ecumenical movement, sharing some of our resources or preparing some workshop where we can write songs to give it to an offer to the ecumenical movement. That last one was one of the songs WCC used for one of their campaigns in the last years. And we are also working together with the Baptist Peace Fellowship in North America and Canada. And for the last maybe 4 or 5 meetings, global meetings or assemblies, we compose different songs, and we are always trying to mix the languages of the people that are participating in these meetings. Sometimes we mix Spanish and English together, but because we have not that much time, we can't share all the songs we want to share with you. We will only share this one. This is from the last one, from the past one. Mena? Okay. Tell me if it was from
2021.
2021. Okay, thank you so much. And this is, I guess, in 4 different languages.
Más allá de las barreras, sobre las alas del viento, por la fuerza del Espíritu, vamos siempre más allá.
La vida nos reclama acción y oración. Cuidar, amar, servir a la creación.
We are soaring in the Spirit, carried further every day, flying far beyond life's barriers to a better, brighter way.
Creation calls inside us to love and serve and care. And when we do, we find that God is there.
Salvitore Maguanehe, das Bashiti Otiquate, Anustagi Ischule, Salvitore Maguanehe.
Likush lechtas kan boti, lekir al kopocher, kelpir kan miskoto libano mi.
Au-delà de nos barrières, elles vont nous commettre des règles par l'Esprit de Dieu Tout-Puissant, surmontons toutes nos peurs.
La vie nous appelle à prier et agir pour soigner et servir la création.
We are soaring as the Spirit, carried every day, flying far beyond life's barriers, somewhat carrying us away.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing the French with us for this song. It was good to see you there. And that's one of the ways we can use to sing together in a church when we are multicultural churches. Singing in all the languages that are present in our church, trying to find or try to find a way to include all the voices of the people that are part of our congregation. We have more songs, but I don't think we will have enough time. So let us move to You Are the Resurrection, Amena, because there you can see, you can take a look to a real North American composer trying to sing bossa nova. Yeah, that one.
You are the resurrection. You are the way, the truth, the life. You are our strength and our defense, our Savior and our light. So let's sing together a new melody of hope, united as your people in your spirit and your song.
Well, I think it's enough, Mena. Because looking at the North American trying to sing bossa nova, it's a big thing. But looking at the North American trying to dance bossa nova, it is too much. So it was enough. Now, many thanks to Greg Sher for this. When we were facing the COVID-19 thing, we tried to find a way to sing all together around the world. It was a project built by our Red Crearte network and WCC to sing a common song for Easter. I wrote a very simple lyrics for that song and asked many composers around the world to put their own rhythm or their own music to it. And many participate. Andrew was part of it. Greg Sher was part of it. Well, I think Simei Monteiro and Per Halling and others around the world. And it was really a very good project. And well, the pandemic is over, but we can still try to do this kind of thing together, to share thoughts and ideas, resources, and also to have some fun, because to have fun is also related to the gospel. It is not only work and suffering and things like that. Let's go to the last slide, because I think I have some important things to say, and we can finish later with one more song. Yeah. Let me conclude this presentation with some challenges that I think it is pertinent to point out. Because whenever the doors of some closets are opened, other closets appear to close the way to authentic freedom within the field of liturgy and the liturgical and musical life of our faith communities. Just as we spoke at the beginning of the musical colonization that came with the European migration and the arrival of missionaries to Latin America, today the religious music industry is causing havoc in our continent. Christian radio stations, which swarm even in the most remote places, do not play any music other than that which came from these octopuses, pulpo, está bien dicho, octopuses of mass music production. Let me see what's important to say, because we have not that much time. Well, why am I using the words Hillsongization and Asburyization? I think this is a topic that maybe some scholars can take and work a little more deeper with this. When we sometimes speak of the danger of Hillsongization of churches, we are referring to the phenomenon referred to in the documentary that reveals that methods of diffusion used by the church. What we usually call worship is born of a marketing strategy whose ultimate purpose is to generate massive, uncritical, alienating consumption like any other entertainment industry. And there is a little left of the gospel in that. And I think it's my own point of view that we are facing a kind of Hillsongization of the liturgical music that came from the global gospel industry. And what I call Asburyization has to do with believing that music is only there to create, to sustain, to accompany, or to emotionally motivate a group of people. It is a phenomenon repeated since the great campaigns of evangelization and in experience wrongly called of revival. Because the revival generated by the Holy Spirit does not happen by being locked up for days singing, praying, or listening to preachings. The revival of the Spirit, on the contrary, opens the closed doors, frees people, takes them out to the street, offers them an understandable language to appeal to the human being who does not know the salvific project of Jesus yet. So I think we have many closets to open. Maybe we can celebrate that we, in the last decennias, had the opportunity to open a lot of closets in many ways, but there are still others that need to be open. And that is also our work, our task as musicians and as liturgists in our churches, in our own context. Thank you so much. If we have some more minutes, maybe we can share one more song, Mena, la de la Paz, que también es de Bautistas. One more minute. This is not a long song. Paz en nuestra tierra.
Andamos buscando paz para esta tierra, oh Dios, mundo sin violencia, respeto por la creación, una casa grande, tiempos de justicia y perdón, de buenos encuentros, espíritus libres y mucha pasión. Paz en nuestra tierra, hagamos un mundo mejor, sin mal, sin violencia, es la tierra que quiere Dios. Paz en nuestra tierra, hagamos un mundo mejor, sin mal, sin violencia, la tierra nueva que quiere Dios. vamos sembrando semillas de esperanza y luz, gestos solidarios, siguiendo en la huella a Jesús, espacios diversos de acción, compasión y de amor, un rumbo a lo nuevo, la paz con justicia.
Well, this song is also translated to English if you like it. It's in cumbia style. I'm open to some question if you have some. Thank you, Andrew, for your comments. Thank you.
There was one question in the Q&A. Janet Wooten said that her internet dropped out every now and then. She's over in Britain, so it's got to travel all the way across the ocean. She said on the last slide you mentioned inclusive language, and she missed what you said about that. And I'm also fascinated to hear you expound a little bit more on inclusive language in Spanish.
Yeah, I think not only inclusive language in Spanish. I think we need to think about inclusive language in all languages, and not only speaking about. Well, in Spanish, él o ella, and make that kind of inclusive language and keep it like that. We need to see how to develop a new liturgical language that make possible also to try to imagine the divinity in other genders. We are always talking in Spanish about God as male, as a man, father, and we are trying to challenge ourselves to find new and creative ways to change our liturgical way to speak about the divinity. It is not easy because I think all the churches globally are facing a conservative wave. It is also related to some political right-wing waves, and we are right now facing in Latin America also a very strong fundamentalistic wave within our Protestant churches that are supposed to be the most progressive churches. So sometimes where you are trying to find new ways to speak about God, you will also face some very strong reactions. So we know, well, when I mean we, I mean the Red Crearte. We know what we need to do and what we are called to do, but we also need to find a pastoral way to do it, and not make this a kind of a liturgical war. Because the world is full of wars and violence, and it has no any sense to replicate the war language of or violent language within our churches and in the dialogue with our Christian mates in our local churches or in our denominations.
Thank you. Andrew Donaldson in the chat was curious about the second word that was next to Hillsongization, and where it came from, and if you could elaborate on that other word.
Well, I saw one time, I couldn't find that article again, the word Hillsongization, and it was wonderful for me to find that word. I have Hillsong friends. I don't want to be the one saying, well, I have a Jew friend, well, I have a gay friend, but it's really true. I have some friends in Hillsong, but the way they are producing music with that standard to impose that music in globally, because we have a Hillsong church here in Buenos Aires, and what they are doing is just to translate the songs that are producing in Australia to Spanish. So that's what I'm calling Hillsongization. It is not also only related to Hillsong, but it is a way to produce music and think that the music you are producing is the best music and the best content ever, and trying to push other people to use only your music, what you are producing, and not giving the opportunity to other people to find their own ways to produce music and to find their own words and their own way to celebrate their faith. That's the way I'm using Hillsongization. And Asburyization is a kind of emotional way to produce music, to I don't know how to explain myself in a good way, but just I think the way people are calling a revival what happened in Asbury during the past weeks is a way to put people together and to close the doors around that people. And what the Spirit are trying to do with our as Christian is to open the doors and to put us in outside the churches, to preach outside the churches, to share the gospel with others, to make this world a better world, and not to have us together singing for days and days and preaching and well, I have not the right word if I have no time to think about how to say it in English. I'm sorry, but I can develop it a little bit more if you want and share my thoughts in a short paper with the people who are interested in this.
Yes, thank you. I think that is all the questions I've seen, and we're right over an hour. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here, for putting this presentation together, and for all the work that you do. We're so happy to be partnering with you in a variety of ways. We're at Red Crearte, and the Center for Congregational Song is working on a partnership right now, and there's just a lot going on. There's so much work to do, and so we're grateful for what you're doing. Our last webinar for this series comes up next month, April 25th. Matthew Buddha is putting together a panel on the topic of what are the songs we need to be writing. So kind of asking the question on behalf of text and tune writers and songwriters, what should we be writing? And that's actually a question that has come up in a variety of ways and a variety of times, and is, I feel like, a question that the Hymn Society grapples with at all times. And so it should be a wonderful panel discussion. So there's still time to catch that next month. And then, of course, all the archives are available. So if you're watching this and you missed one of the previous webinars, those are available if you registered for the full series. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, the Red Crearte team. And I'll look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Okay, I promise I will send you my paper in English so you can share it with people who are interested, and they can follow some of the parts I skipped because of time.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure to get that out to everybody. All right.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.